and just want to lay the foundation for today's session by reviewing for a second and really getting shameless plugs for our earlier sessions. All of the recordings will be available in the YouTube page. Dr. House will send the link out shortly. It was in the chat room from the last section. We'll be sending the link out to everybody who had signed up for a class, and we'll make that available. The real importance today is how do you deliver your online class, the actual day-to-day, how do you conduct an online class? And so just to preface the things that we've talked about, because how you've set the class up is so important and how you're able to conduct the class. So just to review, the things that we've talked about is having a start here page, so the students have a familiarity with your class and know how to navigate your class, how to find information, how to find their expectations. And having that syllabus section that again is directly aligned to your paper syllabus, but clearly outlines what the outcomes of your course are, what the expectations are, and the general schedule of how you're going to progress through that class. By having those two things done and done well, will really facilitate your being able to conduct your class in a meaningful way. And so with that, I'll turn it over to Dr. House. I think I will. Maybe I will. Hoorah!
Okay. So once you've got your course underway, we've talked so far about making sure you've gotten your start here section. And today, this section will focus on delivery of your online course. We spent a bunch of time on how to design your course, but that's only one part of the battle. The other part is actually delivering it. And I think one of the big takeaways we could have from the COVID or period of COVID-19 was that your course may not have been the most beautifully designed online course to ever be taught, but the thing that actually won over the students was not necessarily how pretty the design was, as much as how engaged the instructor was and how engaged the students were. So that the actual delivery of the course was key. And so today we'll focus more on the combination of those things. And now you've designed your course, delivering it in a way that facilitates a high level of student engagement and a high level of faculty engagement in a way that also doesn't burn everyone out, because that can also happen. And so in the first section, we'll talk about using announcements, and then we'll talk about providing feedback and active learning, and a little bit about bridging the gap with online learning. So one of the things to think about is you've set up your course, you've got your menu arranged, you've got your syllabus in, you've got your start here, and everything's set. So then the question is, how do I let students know that where to look and how to even start? And with that, I'd actually ask Gretchen to talk a little bit about announcements and how we can use them to increase engagement in our classes.
Okay, hold on one second. Let me pull up my my shared screen here. Oh, hold on. There we go. So in announcements, which is over here on the left, this is how you want to contact your class. If you need to contact an individual student, you would do that probably with email or using conversations if you had to contact them about a grade issue or something personal, just yourself and one student. But when you're trying to reach out to the entire class, you want to use announcements to do that. And the way you do that is to go to announcements, and you can click on add announcement here. And you've seen this in pages, you've seen it in discussions, you've seen it in assignments, starting to look familiar, but you have the rich content editor here like you have everywhere else. So you can add all kinds of things to your announcements: photos, videos, files, links to assignments, links to other parts of your course, links outside of your course, all kinds of things. One thing that can be kind of neat is if you use the media recorder to do a video announcement and to post a little video to sort of say, hey, welcome to the class, welcome back to the class. Reading over your discussion post last week, I noticed that a lot of people shared this, this resource, and that's a great one to use in your professional practice. And here's a link below. You can put the link into your announcement. But just a one way to provide that connection with students and make them feel like they're really dealing with a real person and not just a chat bot, like when you go to your cell phone provider and try to talk to customer service online or something like that. When you post it, you have all these options. Delay posting, you should never have your announcements set up so that they could be automatically rolled out without any intervention from you. Your announcements are really the interactions between you and that specific section of the class. They are not, it shouldn't be so automated that the class could run without you. So delay posting, the only time I use that is if I have used it in the past when I knew I was going to be traveling and I had given the students a heads up in advance, hey, I'm going to be traveling, I'm going to be out of the country, I will not have access to email, I will respond to email when I return. I kind of posted on the same day that I flew just so that they would get that reminder, this is the day I'm gone, I will be back in a week. By setting it up 2 weeks in advance, it was one thing that I didn't have to worry about on the day that I traveled, for instance. So that's really the only time to use delay posting. Allow users to comment. That's if you wanted your announcement to be like a discussion thread. Podcast feed, don't worry about, because that's only for audio pieces and you're not going to use it. And allow liking that's up to you. They can click like on the announcement if they want. A lot of times people will say, how do I email the whole class? Post it, if you're needing to contact the whole class, post an announcement to do it. You can say, I've actually had to use the announcements before. I always teach in the fall, and the last few falls we've had a windstorm or a rainstorm, and it seems like every one of them takes down a tree in my house, and sometimes it takes out the power. So I've used announcements say, hey, class is canceled, there's a tree on my car, and I will not be in today. So you can post it for that, but you can also post it just to connect to the content, connect to the students, give them the outline for what's coming up in the week ahead for their module, or for, we're going to work through modules 3 and 4 this week. Here's what your assignments will look like. Make sure you leave time to do the research part. The kind of things you would say in a class when you come up to the front of the class. The way students get announcements is that, excuse me, they get it by setting their notifications. So they might get it by email. They might get it as a text message. That's really popular because our students, if they are to add their Husson email to their personal phone, the way our policies are set up is that it would give some admin rights to Husson over that student's phone. So a lot of students don't want to turn over that much ownership of their phone to Husson, which makes sense. So a lot of them will not necessarily get their email on their phone like we might get it. It might mean take an actual act of sitting down, logging into their Husson email to see if there's any messages. So they'll set up their announcements to go to text. Getting a text announcement is great for them. They can see real quickly what the information is, and it works out really well. It also will work in the app if you have, if they download the Canvas student app. That can be very helpful for them to keep on top of their assignments. There's also a Canvas teacher app, which can be handy for you to keep on top of getting these announcements and these things out. I think it's like 95% of what you can do on Canvas on the web, you can do through the app as well. If I click on the home page, I'm not going to save this one, sorry, I had already saved an announcement before. There is a setting that you can set up so that your announcements are always at the top of the home page. And so here's my announcement. If I click on it, it will open the announcement and I could read through it. And to get that is under settings. And if you go to the bottom of that first tab, there's a little link that says more options. I'm going to scroll down, and this is show recent announcements on the course homepage, and you can choose how many you want to show. It defaults to 3, but that's where you can set that up. And then if you wanted to know how to set up notifications or to be able to guide students in how to set up notifications, it's under your account up here. And if I go to notifications, then I have all kinds of things. A lot of these are set up for students. So grading, if they want to see their grades, they can get it notified by a text message with their grades. For faculty, I recommend that you do announcements in case we make announcements through some of our courses. Submission comment, because a student may put a comment on their submission that they expect you to read fairly quickly. So submission comment will alert you to that. And conversations is the inbox of Canvas. And so that might be another place where they're reaching out to you and expecting a response. And you can play around with all these other settings as well. But those are the ones I say to keep on the notify me right away, ASAP setting. Daily summaries come at the end of the day, weekly summaries come at the end of the week, and the X do not send me anything means you don't get a notification for it. Just gonna check. So if students don't set up to get announcements, send out email to all. I wouldn't even send an email because you might miss someone. Trying to maintain an email list, you're not gonna get the ad drops. It can be a lot more work on your part. I think that you should post an announcement in your class that says it is the expectation that you check in on this class, once a day. And here is how you can set your notifications to be sure you get your announcements. So scheduling the announcements ahead of time, you can do that, but you should not set it and forget it. Dave will talk about that in a little bit, but you really shouldn't be setting it and forgetting it too much. You should make sure that you're doing, and I know that you do, Laura, interact with your students a lot, but we don't want people to just set it and forget it and put the course on autopilot in week 1 and show up in week 15 to send the grades to the registrar, that's something you want to be cautious of. And plus, as the pace changes, I always tell my HE 111 students, I'm like, every syllabus you have, I will give you $5 for every one that comes back that a change hasn't been made on. And I have yet to pay out any $5 on that because syllabi, as we all know, change, whether it's just readjusting the date of the exam or we're going to drop this reading or we have a guest speaker coming in, they always change. Okay, and let's see, any other questions for me? Nope, no further questions. Feel free to, again, as always, reach out to me or anyone in this department for help on how to best use your announcements. But I'm always happy to help people whenever I can.
Oh, Gretchen, before you leave, one of the things that came up in the other session was if somebody was scoring on their grade book, how to hide scores or mute scores. It used to be the mute scores.
All right, that's separate from announcements, but yes, I can show that. So for grades, this is a new grade book as of January. If you search your Gmail, I did a series of emails on these at the beginning of the semester that walk through this. So if you search for tech tips, you'll find some screenshots and some walkthroughs of this showing the different features of the new grade book. But one of them is, instead of muting grades, which is what it said before, it's grade posting policy. So when you open up the grade posting policy, you have automatically or manually. Manually is the new mute. So if you are working through a series of 20 essays, it's going to take you a couple days, and you don't want, Travis Allen is always at the front of the list because of his last name, and Gretchen Schaefer is always at the bottom because of her last name. So I always get my grades 3 days after Travis. If you don't want that kind of drama, you can set your grades to be manually posted. So you can go through and make all of your edits and your comments and do your scoring. And once everyone's done, then you can say, okay, I'm ready to post the grades, and there'll be an option to post the grades then. You can also set it for the entire course in the grade book. Let me get down here. You can see here it says manual. And then whoops, sorry. Once I want to post them, I can go to post grades, and then it will take it and say one is hidden, I want everyone, or just graded. So I'm going to say I want everyone to get them. I can click on save, and then the grades will release to the student. You can set it up for the entire class if you go over here to the settings gear. Whoops. Go to the settings gear and go to grade posting policy. You can say manually post grades. It makes every one of your assignments manual, and you just have to post them as you go. Any other questions?
All right.
Yeah.
Thanks, Gretchen. So we've started our course, we've got our syllabus, we've got our start here, and we've talked a bit about announcements. And remember, we're using announcements in a few ways. And one is a kickoff for the class, and it's a great kickoff for every week. What are those expectations? What kinds of things should students be doing? Then we have one at the end of the week, which summarizes what we've done, where we've been, some common themes, or maybe some common issues we've identified in the course that we need to clarify. And to be extra, a nice addition is doing a midweek check, a short announcement in the midweek saying, oh, by the way, here's what we've been working on. As a reminder, if you haven't started on this, you should. If you have started, great. Remember, these things are due at this point, or we'll be looking for this by Saturday or Sunday or whatever. These simple reminders are things we often do in our face-to-face course that we don't necessarily even think about sometimes, but this is a way of putting it in our online course as a way of keeping a high-value practice and then just putting it, transferring it into an online format. Okay. This is also an important set of engagement points between an instructor and a student, so that student to instructor engagement. One of the other things that it enables you to do, and one of the key parts of facilitating your online course, has to do with feedback and feedback loops. Gretchen kicked this off by one of the first things on the feedback loop, and that's grades. You know, I like to joke, I've been teaching for 20 years, and one thing that's been fairly consistent with students over that time has been that students are always interested in when their grade is coming out and have you graded that yet? You know, sometimes even within 2 hours of turning an assignment in, you might have a student ask, oh, by the way, have you graded that yet? So that's one part of it. How we give feedback online is also important. And so we're often very good at giving feedback in our face-to-face courses, and there's a number of nonverbal cues that often go with the way we can give types of feedback in a class. So if we're having a discussion, or we're talking with someone, if we're facilitating a course, or even turning back grades, and we can preface it by saying, okay, everyone did really well on the following things. These are common areas for improvement, things like that. What we've done to the group is managed to couch maybe some firmer kinds of feedback that we placed on individual assignments. And so as we provide feedback on our individual assignments, the things we're looking to do is make sure that we're providing feedback in a way that doesn't crush our students, and it can be easy to do without that visual cue. So what does that mean? It means that when we provide feedback, we are providing something more than just a grade. So it's more than a number, it's more than just a rubric line, that we have to be balanced, sensitive, specific, constructive, and clear. So we're balanced, meaning one of the things we point out is things that maybe the student did very well, and then we can point to things that maybe the student needed to improve. So we start off with, wow, I really like how you managed to incorporate the following details into your answer. Not many people have seen that. However, this, here's some areas that would make this even better. And then you start adding. So when you do it that way, it becomes a little, not only easier to take, but it also becomes a more complete set of comments and pieces of feedback. And one of the other things you're looking to do, especially when you're looking at feedback on assignments that are more of a rehearsal for them, right? They're not the high stakes assignments. They're things to help students practice. Much to the chagrin of the Allen Iversons of the world, practice is important. So if it's for practice, you're trying to target continuous improvement. And part of that is you're coaching them, you're encouraging them, say, yep, that wasn't ideal, but now you see how to make that adjustment or that shift. Your feedback needs to be sensitive, and part of balance is sensitivity. So recognizing that if I give a laundry list of, well, you didn't have this, or this, and I just throw that out there without any context or without any kind of helpful summation or suggestion for improvement, what I've done is pointed out a number of flaws to someone in a nonverbal format, or right? So I've just sent a list of your flaws. Here you go. These are all the things you're bad at. So that's also not the best way, maybe, to frame students towards continuous improvement, because, we don't want to scare them away. We want them to improve and come back. So those are things that you're already doing in face-to-face courses. I think, once again, it's some of those context clues of nonverbal cues and take place in the face-to-face format that don't necessarily translate so easily into online. So we have to be extra sensitive to that. Our feedback has to be specific. So it's not enough to say, well, use a proofreader next time. Okay, probably going to need some clearer feedback on that one. So if students are going astray, we need to let them know exactly how they're going astray or where, and to come back. And you can also give directions saying, okay, this is not quite right, and give a general direction with the caveat that, now I want you to go and I want you to focus on maybe this activity or this concept and review it, and then see if you can spot maybe where you were going wrong. You can give them a little hint and put them on the way and have them come back with a revision. And sometimes that works very well. And so it just depends on the type of assessment or assignment that they're working on. And once again, your feedback should be constructive. You're looking at with an eye towards continuous improvement. So it should give them something that they can do. So if I was submitting something and it wasn't great, and even if I maybe it's a major assessment and I can't resubmit it, it should tell me in the future, if I was going to do this again, what are some actionable things that I could do that would have corrected this? And we need to be clear. So we need to be able to convey our concerns clearly, and not in a confusing fashion. So we have to make sure that our students understand what we're saying. One of the other things is we have this public and private dichotomy that we'll talk, Travis will talk about in a bit. I like to say that Canvas is our course of record in our class of record. And so some instructors like to use external tools, maybe like a MyLabs or a Connect or anything like that. And as a rule, they can be helpful, but there are also a number of issues with this kind of material. And so it's very much something that I would caution using at times, and that I would use the phrase with it, caveat emptor, very much so. So a couple of things. if you are using it, and there are some very legitimate applications for it, and that we definitely want to use it for those applications, just make sure that if you have students completing an assignment or graded items there, that those graded items do get ported over to Canvas on a regular basis. So that way students know where they stand. That the course should take place in Canvas and not on the external LMS of a third-party publisher to which none of us have access. Because then when students have technology problems, they can call the help desk in my office all they want. There's nothing we can really do to support them. And if they've had an issue lately with MyLabs or anything else, they can call the Pearson hotline to be told that due to COVID-19, their helpline is closed, so there's no help they can provide. So that's one. Two, very recently, and I've mentioned accessibility in earlier presentation today. Just this year, the Los Angeles County Community College District was held liable for a series of courses that were found to be inaccessible. And the centerpiece of those courses included MyLabs and McGraw-Hill Connect materials. The judge found them inherently inaccessible for people with disabilities, and they held the school liable, not the publisher. And in those cases, if that is a problem and we were to be asked about that, we would be held accountable for that inaccessibility, not the publisher, because we're the instructors of record and we are the college of record. So it's great, and they can make materials available. We just have to make sure that another feedback thing is that our stuff is accessible to students, and that when we're porting grades and things over, we're getting it into Canvas and our course is housed in Canvas. And then it's the home base.
So David, nursing uses Shadow Health extensively. It's not anything that could be in Canvas. We have to bring the grades over.
Yep.
And put them into the grade book in Canvas.
Yep.
But who assesses whether or not Shadow Health is accessible?
So that's something we reviewed with the nursing department when they first signed their contract. And that is something that met the guidelines. So it's clear, it's good. The big thing is just making sure the grades poured over. And like I said, it's not that you can't use any of these tools. It's just that we just have to take great care in how we use them and in adapting them and identifying them from the start. And with Shadow Health, we did. So,
okay. Thanks.
Yeah. No, the nursing department was very careful in identifying it. So the other thing is that feedback is this regular interaction. It's very easy for students to disappear. It's very easy sometimes for faculty to disappear. And that's one of the things we're trying to avoid. And so Travis is going to talk a little bit about making sure how to use your course data or your class data and the public-private issue.
Great, thank you. So just to sort of build on what Dave was talking about before I go into some of the data stuff, is when you're building your assignments, you want to make sure you explain what that third party is. So if you do want them to go to Shadow Health, you should have an assignment in Canvas that says you're going to go to Shadow Health and this is what you're doing. And the more context that you can put into there to connect to the rationale for why that's being used, what the expectation is, when the due date is, all of those things, then that's sort of using your Canvas as home base. If a student at that point goes to Student Success Services or to somebody else, a tutor, and says, I am lost, I have no idea what I'm supposed to be doing, they could go into your Canvas shell and say, oh, well, you're supposed to be in Shadow Health, and this is what you're supposed to be doing. Having that central hub goes a long way to facilitating students' ability to complete. It's less likely to get lost. And if we're not explaining that, they just have all these products and they don't know what to do with them. And as we sort of move forward with other things, that's really sort of the central part of giving feedback, is connecting it to the course outcomes, connecting it to the professional expectations of what that student wants to do. When we start looking at adult learning theory, the more we can connect our feedback and our expectations to professional aspirations, career goals, and our accreditation standards, or your program outcomes or your course outcomes, the more relevance that student can see, and hence more likely be able to meet those. So with that, sort of moving into looking at the data in your class, online courses often offer a great depth of formative information that you can gather if you're using discussion boards, if you're doing small assignments, if you do have some kind of synchronous interaction where you do sort of gauge back and forth between your students. I would really encourage all faculty to really look at the formative information that's available to you and use that as a faculty member. One, to gauge the individual student's progression towards your summative assessment. Are they actually ready to demonstrate the skill and knowledge that you expect? But also formatively to you as the faculty. Ooh, the whole class is sort of struggling with this. I should modify my class slightly to make sure that I'm addressing that. If you have a deficit and it goes unaddressed, oftentimes that will snowball and interfere with the student's ability to grasp the next concept and the concept after that. Because most things in your class are interconnected in terms you've taught one thing to teach something else to teach something else. And a deficit would sort of bring down that whole chain. So pay attention to the lower stakes things in your class. Look at your student performance and modify your instruction or resources as appropriate. The other thing to look at is some of the student level data that you're going to find, and a lot of this is in Dropout Detective. But is your student actually passing things in on time? Are they actually coming to your synchronous components? Are they actually engaging in any conversations that you're having either synchronously or asynchronously? Are they actually progressing in your class? Oftentimes, if we could identify that early enough, you know, our students not engaged in this class, it's a symptom of something else. Either they have a job and they have to work a lot, they have a family, they have a sick family member, they have a child. You know, there's all kinds of student level things that could really sort of cause them to separate from your class. But the earlier you can identify that through monitoring some of this data and reaching out to them, giving them access to other services at the university, oftentimes they can catch up. But if we sort of let that go and they disengaged around the second week and now we're on the 15th week, it's really unrealistic to think that that student can compress your entire class into 1 week or something like that to get caught up. So the more we can monitor those things that are available in the online education and reach out to students so it's just not festering over time until they find themselves in a position that, you know, is unattainable for them and unattainable for you as a faculty member. The last thing I want to sort of talk about is when you're giving feedback, especially in some of the more public things that are available in online, like the discussion areas, the use of positive feedback is incredibly powerful. For those who have a K-12 background, if that one kid does something right, you stop the class, you say, look what this student did. And because you're trying to create the culture of your class, the expectations, the shared values, and the more you can reinforce what you want to happen, the more the other students are going to do that. There's always time to give constructive feedback, especially feedback that's aligned to your course outcomes and your career aspirations. But the public praise, especially in things like discussion boards, will really go a long way to shaping how your students interact in that class. So I do throw that out there to make sure that, you know, people are taking care or taking advantage of that opportunity. Looking at the chat, I'm not seeing any questions. Okay, so with that, if there's no questions, I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Vigu for active learning. Unless, was there anything else, Dave?
No, that was great. Thanks,
Excellent. Dr. Vigu, all you.
Hey, everybody. So I'm just going to talk briefly about active learning, and then we're going to do some together. So active learning in the face-to-face classroom and the online environment just refers to a broad range of teaching strategies in which students are engaged as active participants during the class time with you. It's closely related to collaborative learning, and it encourages the students to process with you there as the expert to guide them. So reciprocal teaching, gamification like role play games, strategy games, mock IEPs, interprofessional problem solving, using graphic organizers to make sense of super complex information, or organized writing and speaking. These are all examples of active learning. Popular examples are turn and talk protocols, Socratic seminars, jigsaws for content, all of which can be morphed from the face-to-face classroom to your online environment. And shameless plug, we love helping with that thinking. So in a minute, we'll actually try one together. But first, maybe a little tiny bit of research. Passive learning, where a student is just sort of sitting and taking in a lecture, has its place, but it exists at the lower end of Bloom's. It sort of encourages memorization and recall, and that can be perfectly appropriate, and students need a balance of that with active learning, which is specifically key to higher level Bloom's and the ability to analyze or apply or evaluate. We know from research that lower performing students benefit the most from active learning, from that opportunity to sort of grapple with information in a hands-on way. And we know that almost all adult learners need an experiential component that incorporates your content material in a way that helps them think about their future, make transfer to their future career ambitions. Even if an adult learner thinks information that is being imparted is important, if they don't experience it, we know from research that they're far less likely to engage in the learning process or even retain that information. So we're going to try it. So if you'll bear with me for 1 sec while I share my screen with you. So one great active learning, wait a minute, can everybody see the screen? Can you see the, okay. So active learning, a great way to start class is with a bell ringer. And sometimes you might have heard those referred to as anticipatory sets or as the hook to engage everyone. But the power in them is to have a consistent start to your classes, so that when students come in, they kind of expect that you're going to have them just get right to work. And the best thing to do is to tie them right to your learning outcomes for the day. You can have it be a daily poem. If you're going to teach literary devices and you want to have, you want to give them a poem that if you're going to teach a metaphor that day, give them a poem with some metaphors in it. Let them try to figure out what they see for metaphors, and then give them the instruction and metaphor, and then flip back to it and say, all right, now tackle that poem with those metaphors. Another great way that somebody mentioned the other day that, and I hear a lot from nursing that they do, is tying to current events. Tie the instruction to something that matters to them in their daily life. I bet a lot of you have been tying the COVID stuff in the classes that deal with medical issues. Use a thought-provoking question. That's another strategy you can use for a bell ringer. In other words, sort of engage them in debate, get them sort of debating one another, and then weigh in with your expertise, share your rationale, and give them opportunity to practice that reasoning in front of you. So you might do that by going to a breakout room. You can also use questions from your licensing exam. That's really powerful, especially if those questions are related to the daily outcome. And the key, when the students, the key is to give them an opportunity to get comfortable. So that's why we sometimes use a turn and talk protocol for this. So if it's brand new information and they're grappling with it for the first time, they probably don't want to shout out an answer. And so what you do is you give them an opportunity in the regular face-to-face classroom to just sort of turn and talk to their neighbor and sort of sort out some of their thinking, and then ask them to articulate not only what they came up with, but what their neighbor might have come up with, because it's really good for them to be a good listener and to have to sort of talk about that sort of thing. So the student sort of explains the other person's thinking to the group, and everybody starts to construct knowledge together. But the key here is, how do you do this in an online environment? So what we're gonna do, if you don't mind, I'm gonna stop sharing my screen, I think. Well, I was. I'm sorry. There we are. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna ask you, if you're not live here with us, if you'll put your video on and come back. And we're gonna ask you to go into either a breakout room. You can request a breakout room. We'll provide you with one if you would like one, or you can make a phone call to somebody on your cell phone. You can use the chat feature and just have a quick little chat. But what we're gonna ask you to do is to have a little conversation, a virtual turn and talk with somebody about how you could use a bell ringer in your classroom. We're gonna give you a couple minutes to do that, and then ask you to come back and share out some of the strategies that you came up with. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but I'm not sure how we get in little groups.
Okay, so so let's see here. How about if, Charlie, do you mind setting up a group?
Gretchen has to be the host.
Oh, okay, Gretchen, do you mind? And maybe a couple of people from nursing could go into a group together if they so chose.
Sure, I actually just sent it to Charlie.
Ah, perfect.
Sorry.
Okay, so again, what we're doing is take a second to talk with somebody, whether you use the chat feature and you privately message them, or whether you call them or you ask and we'll put you in a group. And you're going to talk about a way that you could use a bell ringer in the online environment. So maybe about 10 more seconds. Okay, so what we'll do is if you would be willing to share a strategy that you might use in the online environment for a bell ringer, go ahead and unmute yourself and tell us what you're thinking. Who's going to be that brave first person? Sandeep, I'm totally going to out you. I know you have one because you just texted it to me.
No. All right. The first thing that came to my mind was using a discussion post. You know, if on a day you have multiple discussion posts, and maybe even before they come to the class, so they have to do this before they come to class. I don't know, I have to work that out. But a discussion post, and for us, I was thinking of doing some kind of a question related to a course outcome du jour or of the week. Since some of the courses meet once a week, that's not, you know, the question du jour becomes the question of the week. But I you know, having the students always be thinking it reflectively to make that connection to licensure or the standards or the outcomes or their something more than their own personal experience. Maybe two questions. One's their personal experience, and then move it into that larger arena of having to think about their work, not just themselves. That was an idea.
Thank you. Somebody else?
The only bell ringer activity I think I've used on the online class, I really like this program called Adam Ruins Everything. And he does these really geeky kind of little evidence-based skits. And so I asked them to analyze one of his analyses. So like for, you know, the usefulness of vitamins or the evidence supporting vitamins. And so I have, that's the first thing we do in the class. And so they have to watch this short skit, and then they have to, in a discussion form, explain what they learned from, you know, the lack of real evidence that supports this, and how that's what we're doing in the class going forward. So it's the only thing I think I've ever that could resemble a bell ringer.
Yep. Other ideas for the online environment? So we're being totally meta here, right? We're sort of putting us into an active learning environment, and it feels a little awkward. It feels awkward for me waiting, even though I know that wait time is a really important aspect of teaching. And I bet that it feels a little like, I bet it took a lot of courage to unmute the button and say something about a strategy that you use. And it's the same for our students. And so being aware of that and giving them that opportunity to go into a breakout room and have some time to really process before they bring their thoughts back to the classroom. And you know, you have the opportunity as the host to flip from room to room, just like you would in the classroom, sort of walk from them to sort of listen to what they're saying, to guide if you hear misconceptions. So all of these things are things that you can do to promote active learning in your classroom. And yes, shameless plug, we especially love to work with you if you tell us what your outcome is on some of those things. All right, I am going to mute myself and turn this back to Dave, who's going to kind of wrap things up. I know we're getting close to time here. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Liz. And so we've gone through active learning and some final thoughts or some things to remember as we go through facilitating our online course. And one of the things I always like to say is that part of this process is bridging the gap between design and delivery. So we've mentioned, and earlier today, we've set communication expectations and timeframes. Standards of interaction for students. They should be polite to each other on the discussion boards and things. No, being polite to each other as colleagues, polite to everyone else, expectations and timeframes for feedback and for and for turnaround time for email and things. And one of the things to always keep in mind is, I'm going to share this. So that we set those weekly expectations in our announcements and remind and remind and remind. We have the communications expectations. One of the key things we need to do, and it's very easy to put a bunch of materials in an online shell and tell students to go at it. But remember that part of that process is that we're providing context, explanation, and instruction. And so making sure we set up their expectations, we provide them feedback on those, on how they're reaching those expectations, and those instructional takeaways. And we use the right tools for the job. So if we're asking them to actually have a discussion, we're using the discussion board. If we're telling them to really write a response or an essay, then we have it as an assignment, and that we're transparent. So, one of the things is students are always anxious to see like when feedback is coming or when grades are coming, and to be transparent about it means that, you may not have that feedback done in 3 days or whatever it is, but you set up expectations as to what that turnaround time is. And then you're just transparent with your students saying, it's taking me a little longer. Here's when they'll be done. And giving them that information along the way is incredibly helpful, because in the absence of that information, they will invent any monsters that can possibly exist, and often do, and assume things that, I know it was horrible, and that wasn't it at all. It's just making sure that you have adequate time to provide good feedback. And like I always say with these things, keeping assignments manageable for you and the students. So making sure that your assignments and grading load is reasonable. So you may have, and I see this a lot, teachers have like 15 really good ideas for every unit. And so let's do them all. And the do everything strategy, it didn't work well for Francis Willard and the WCTU in the 1800s. And it's also something that doesn't work so well in the classroom now anyway. So making sure you focus on those things that are need to knows and how you deliver that. And I think better than having a big spread or pattern of multiple exercises for every single outcome, high value attempts at rehearsal and then assessment, and maybe reducing that number, but having really good quality experiences with meaningful feedback. That's the loop you want. That's what keeps the students engaged. And then finally, making sure, I always like to say this is an education, so there's a narrative structure. And so I joke sometimes that I've seen courses where there's a bunch of stuff and it's more organized. So it's fairly well organized in one sense. The stuff is arranged, so it doesn't look like Fibber McGee's closet. It looks more like Casey Kasem's playlist from the America's Top 40. And so what I like to remind is, remember, we're Paul Harvey, not Casey Kasem. Casey spun the hits with the long distance dedication. Paul Harvey gave you the rest of the story. And remember, part of this online education is not that we're simply a DJ spinning the hits and just giving people materials for them to do themselves, that we're connecting them to the rest of the story and the big picture. So while we can keep our feet on the ground and keep reaching for those stars, I would like us to remember now the rest of the story. Also remember that it's not set it and forget it. This can become easy. We have a well-developed class. We've got the things looped in. We press play. There it goes. And it's like turning the lights on to your classroom. The students are sitting there. All right, get to your work, and then walking out and not coming back until week 15. So we have to make sure that we are constant participants, because it is so easy to disappear for faculty and for students. So here's what can happen is faculty can get overwhelmed with lots of assignments and lots of grading, and they're trying to catch up. Students misinterpret that and think, well, my faculty member doesn't care. Another problem is that sometimes, while faculty are very well intentioned about saying, I want students to participate in this discussion, I don't want to force them any one way or the other. And that can be a legitimate strategy. But if faculty are not at all participants in a discussion board, what it can also mean for many students is that they just don't care. And so therefore, this is not that important. It's busy work. I just have to get through it. And so a well-intentioned activity doesn't become a high-value practice. So what we want to make sure of is that faculty are regular participants, because when faculty are regular participants, students will be. Not every student. As I joke, there are some students in any class, face-to-face, online, wherever, a small percentage of them are not necessarily wanting to be there, or they're figuring that out. And, you know, you could have George Clooney dressed as Batman and Russell Crowe dressed as the Gladiator, and they could be acting their movies out live and in person while throwing $100 bills at them, and they still wouldn't want to be there. And so there's not much you're going to do with that, but I do guarantee that by staying as a regular participant and not disappearing, more students will not disappear. And additionally, what it will mean is that you can find when students are not participating, they're not engaging, and you can provide early intervention and a possibility for recovery. So by being that regular participant, by taking note of student patterns, just like you would in a face-to-face class, I guarantee you'll increase engagement and you'll make a more rewarding experience for both you and your students. And that's why we're here. And so thanks for bearing with me and with all of us for the last few sessions. If you have any questions, we'll answer them. I'll check in on the chat here. All right. It looks like we're good. So thanks for hanging in with us. Like I said, if you do need any assistance, please send us a ticket or give us a call. And some of these things, these are the basics. So as you get more involved in designing your course in these things, we recognize there's going to be some more custom kinds of questions and solutions, and we're able to provide those. So please do contact us. I will have more information coming out in the next week about the how to design your online course class, as well as the class on how to facilitate your online course. And that will be a more formal experience over a series of weeks. And if you are interested in seeing these, they'll be in our resource library as well as in our YouTube channel. So I should provide the link for the YouTube channel, which is here. I provided it in the chat. So you can access that, hit that subscribe button, and we'll have updates coming out. We have things for faculty as well as for students and anyone in the public who's interested or alums. So keep an eye on it, follow it along, and take care, stay well, and we will see you soon.